To the world, Marcus was the man everyone wanted at their dinner party: funny, generous, impossible not to love. At home, he was a locked door, and I spent 7 years standing in the hallway knocking, not understanding why no one ever answered. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I remember the exact light in the kitchen. That low, slanted autumn light that comes through the window above the sink and turns everything gold for about 40 minutes before it disappears. I had a dish towel in my hand. I had just finished washing up from lunch, and the kids were at school, and I was about to sit down with my second cup of coffee, which was the one good part of my day when Marcus wasn't home. His phone was on the counter. He'd left it charging when he went out that morning. It had been buzzing occasionally, and I had not been looking at it because I was not, in those days, a person who looked at her husband's phone. I had decided years earlier that choosing not to look was the same as choosing to trust him, and I had been very committed to that choice. But then it rang, actually rang, and the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name. I stood there looking at it for 3 full rings, and then I picked it up. I want to tell you that what happened in that call destroyed me. I want to tell you it came out of nowhere and shattered something that had been whole. But that's not actually true. What that phone call did was finally give a name and a shape to something I had already felt for years, but could never quite hold still long enough to examine. What it destroyed was my last remaining excuse to stay. His name was Marcus, and I met him at a birthday party when I was 26, and he was 31, and I had never in my life met anyone who moved through a room the way he did. I know that sounds like a cliché. Everyone says that about the charming one, but I want to try to describe it accurately because I think it matters. Marcus didn't work a room. That implies effort. Marcus inhabited rooms. He made you feel, when you were talking to him, that he had been waiting all evening to find you specifically. That you were the person this party had been missing. He had this gift of total focus. When his eyes were on you, they were completely on you, and you felt the warmth of that like standing in direct sunlight. I fell for it in approximately 30 minutes. By the end of that night, he had my number, a plan for dinner on Saturday, and the name of the obscure novelist I'd mentioned liking so that he could read something before we met. I drove home at midnight thinking, this is the one, which is embarrassing to admit, but it is also true. We dated for 8 months, and then he proposed on a trip to Portugal, on a terrace overlooking the ocean, with a ring that was more than I would have chosen for myself, but was exactly him. Grand, beautiful, the kind of gesture that becomes a story you tell at dinner parties. We got married on a Saturday in June. There were 120 people there. Marcus gave a toast that made half the room cry. My mother pulled me aside afterward and said, "That man loves you so much." And I believed it. Why wouldn't I? I had all the evidence in the world. The first thing I noticed, looking back, was how tired I always was after social events. Not the ordinary tired of a late night, a specific kind of tired, a wrung-out, emptied kind of tired that didn't make sense given how much fun it appeared we were having. Marcus was extraordinary in groups. He would be up until 2 in the morning holding court at a dinner party, telling stories, drawing people out, filling the room with laughter. I would watch him from across the table and think, God, I love him, and I meant it. But on the drive home, he would fall silent. Not comfortable silence, closed silence, like a curtain coming down. And by the time we got inside, he would be somewhere else entirely, somewhere I couldn't reach, and I would think, I'll give him space, he's tired, that's a lot of being on. Except it wasn't just after parties. It was most evenings, it was most weekends. The man who was warm and present and full of light with everyone else became, in the privacy of our home, someone who was simply not there. Not cruel, not angry, not cold exactly, just absent, like a radio that only broadcasts on certain frequencies, and home was not one of them. I told myself this was normal. Introverts recharge alone, I'd read somewhere, maybe he was more introverted than he seemed. I told myself all sorts of things. What I didn't tell myself, because I wasn't ready to, was that I was lonelier in my marriage than I had ever been alone. We had 2 kids in the first 4 years of our marriage, a boy and then a girl. Having children with someone is an act of extraordinary faith, and I had given that faith to Marcus. I do not regret my children. I want to be clear about that, but I want to be honest about what their arrival revealed. It revealed that I was going to be doing this largely by myself. Marcus was a wonderful father in the way he was a wonderful husband. In public, in moments that could be witnessed and admired. He coached Leo's soccer team when Leo was 6, and he was genuinely good at it, and the other parents loved him and told me constantly how lucky I was. He took Rosie to father-daughter events at school and sent me photos, and I would look at those photos and feel a strange doubling sensation, like looking at a life that was mine, but from a distance I couldn't close. At home, the bedtimes and the sick nights and the homework and the 1,000 invisible tasks fell to me. Not because he was explicitly cruel about it, because he was never quite present enough to participate. He would be in the next room, technically home, but unreachable. And if I asked him to do something, take over, be here, he would do it with a quality of performance that made it clear he was doing me a favor rather than parenting his own children. I complained once early on. I said I felt like I was doing everything alone. He looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "Elena, I work 60 hours a week. What more do you want?" I didn't have an answer that he would have accepted, so I stopped asking. That was a mistake. I know that now. I kept making things smaller to fit into the space he was willing to give, and the problem with that is it works for a while. You can make yourself very small if you practice. The problem is you keep having to get smaller, and there is no point at which he notices and says, "Stop, that's enough, you're too small now, come back." He just keeps taking up the same amount of space, and you just keep shrinking. My sister Diane had seen it early. Diane is 4 years older than me and has always been the kind of person who notices things. Not in a meddling way, more in a watching from a distance, forming opinions quietly way. She liked Marcus when they first met. Most people did. But she told me later, much later, that something in the second year of our marriage had shifted her read on him. She had come to visit us for a long weekend, and she had watched how things worked in our house. The way I moved around him. The way I checked his mood before making decisions. The way I intercepted a moment where Leo was about to ask Marcus for something and redirected it to myself instead, without thinking, just as a reflex. She told me she thought about saying something then, and she had decided not to. She thought I wouldn't hear it. She thought I'd need to get there on my own. So she just kept the door open. That's how she described it when we finally talked about it. She never stopped calling, even when I was bad at calling back. She never made me feel judged for the choices she could see weren't working. She was just there, consistently, without pressure, which I understand now was its own kind of love. But I didn't call Diane when I needed to. For a long time, I didn't call anyone. The friendship thing crept up on me so slowly, I genuinely didn't see it happening. I had good friends before Marcus. A close group from college, women I had known through my 20s, the kind of friendships where you could go months without seeing someone and pick up exactly where you left off. I valued those friendships. I would have told you, even in the middle of losing them, that I valued them. But they require time and energy and emotional availability. And I had so little of any of those things left over after managing the household and the kids and Marcus's moods and his schedule, and the constant background task of keeping everything running while remaining invisible to him. I started canceling plans. Then I stopped making them. I stopped texting back as quickly as I used to. I stopped sharing things, personal things, because Marcus had made some comment early in our marriage about how I shared too much with outside people, about how certain things should stay between us, and I had taken that on board and gradually curated myself smaller and smaller. My college friend Nina tried hardest to hold on. She called for years after the lunches stopped. I would see her name on my phone and feel genuine warmth and genuine exhaustion in the same moment, because answering required energy I didn't have and explaining what my life was actually like felt impossible. Marcus was so well-liked, so universally beloved. I could hear how it would sound if I tried to describe it. He's emotionally absent, he's not really there. And I could hear Nina saying, "But he's so lovely, you two seem so happy." I kept making excuses for him because the alternative was too hard to face. And in making excuses for him to others, I made the friendships increasingly hard to maintain. Because you can only hide so much before conversations become shallow, and shallow conversations don't sustain anything. One day I realized I had no one to call. Not really. My phone was full of contacts, and I had no one I could call and say the real thing. It was one of the loneliest moments of my adult life. The threat happened about 2 years before the phone call. I had been trying to find language for what I was feeling, and I had started, carefully, tentatively, raising the idea of separating. Not screaming, not dramatic, just a conversation. I said I thought we had grown apart. I said I wasn't happy and I didn't think he was either, not really. I said maybe we needed to think about what we actually wanted. Marcus was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was even, very measured, very controlled. He said, "If you pursue this, I will fight for full custody of Leo and Rosie. I will get it, Alina. Do you understand? A judge will look at you and they will look at me and you will not win. And this house and everything in it will go through a process that will take years. I will make sure of it. And I will make sure that everyone we know understands exactly what kind of wife you chose to be." I just sat there. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't even particularly hostile. He said it the way he might say a business negotiation outcome. Factual, settled. I thought about my children. I thought about the house we'd built together. I thought about the life that we had assembled, that was real, that was ours. And I thought about how convincing he was to everyone. How universally admired. I thought about going to those mutual friends and saying, "He threatened me," and watching their faces show disbelief or worse, concern for him, for his side of it. Because that was the worst part of being married to a man like Marcus. He was so charming to everyone outside our relationship that I genuinely did not believe anyone would have believed me if I had tried to explain. He was the man who remembered everyone's names, who showed up for funerals and opened his wallet for charity drives and gave that unforgettable toast at our wedding. I was his quiet wife who apparently had everything and should be grateful. Who was I going to tell? I backed down. I told him I was sorry and I wasn't serious and I was just tired and scared. And some part of me believed all of that. It was easier than facing what I now knew he was capable of. Looking back, that was the moment I should have found a lawyer. Instead, I spent 2 more years trying to make it work. The phone call. The woman's name was Cassie. She asked for Marcus immediately, efficiently, the way you call someone you have regular access to and don't think twice about. When I said he wasn't home, she paused, and I heard something change in her voice, a recalibration. She said, "Who is this?" I said, "His wife." The silence that came after that was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then she said, "His wife." Not a question, just repeating it. The way you repeat something when you're trying to make it fit into a mental model where it has no place. I said, "Yes, how do you know Marcus?" She told me. Not everything, not then, not in that first call, but enough. She had been seeing him for over a year. She had met his friends. Some of them, apparently, knew. She had not known about me. She thought he was divorced, had been for 2 years, shared custody of his kids on the weekends he was with them. The weekends he was away for work. We were on the phone for 20 minutes. We were strangers dismantling the same lie from different angles. There was something almost unbearably intimate about it. By the end of the call, she was crying and I was not, which surprised me. I had gone to a place beyond crying. I was somewhere very still and very clear. I said, "Thank you for calling." She said, "I'm so sorry." I hung up and stood in that gold October light for a long time. I called Diane before Marcus came home. I had not called my sister in anything like a crisis for years. I had been managing everything privately for so long that picking up the phone felt like a physical exertion. But there was something about having no other options that simplifies things. When your only call is the right call, you make it. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the phone call. I told her about the other woman. I told her, while I was at it, about the threat, about the years before the threat, about the slow erosion of myself I had been pretending wasn't happening. Diane listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Okay, I'm going to give you a name. She's a family lawyer and she's very good. You're going to call her first thing tomorrow morning. And tonight, you're going to be completely normal when Marcus comes home. Can you do that?" And the absurd, terrible thing was, yes, I could do that. I had been doing exactly that for 7 years. I said, "Yes." She said, "Alina, I love you. I've been waiting for this call." I didn't answer for a second because something cracked open in me hearing that. Not the calling me in crisis part. The "I've been waiting" part. knowing she had been watching and hoping and keeping the door open all this time without saying a word. I said, "I know, I'm sorry it took so long." She said, "Don't be, just make the call tomorrow." I was extraordinary that evening. I am not proud of this in the way you might expect. There is a kind of competence that you develop when you've been performing stability for years, and it is not actually a strength. It is a symptom, but I used it that night. I made dinner. I talked to Marcus about his day. I helped Leo with his homework and read to Rosie and got them both to bed. I sat on the couch with my husband while he watched television and I thought, "You have been living a completely different life and I have had no idea." Except I wonder now how true that is. I wonder if some part of me had known. Not the specifics, not Cassie, not the year of weekends and the manufactured story about being divorced. But something. Something in the quality of his absence, in the particular way he came home on Monday mornings after those weekends, slightly more settled than usual, more tolerant of the house and its noise. I had explained that away too. I was very good at explaining things away. He went to bed at 10, and I sat in the kitchen in the dark, and I thought about my children sleeping upstairs, and I thought about the house and the threat, and I thought about what Diane had said. And I thought about Cassie, a woman I had never met and would probably never meet again, who had called a stranger's number looking for the man she loved and found his wife instead. I didn't hate her. That surprised me too. I had thought, in some abstract way, that if I ever found out Marcus was cheating, I would feel the rage of betrayal. What I actually felt was something closer to recognition. Like she and I had both been conned by the same magic trick and neither of us was the fool. She had called because she deserved the truth. I respected that. The lawyer's name was Pamela Cho. She was small and direct, and had the energy of someone who had heard every possible version of every possible domestic situation and had no time for unnecessary drama but infinite time for necessary detail. I liked her immediately. I sat in her office 3 days after the phone call and I told her everything. The marriage, the absence, the threat, the affair, the children. She listened and took notes, and at the end she looked up and said, "He threatened to fight for full custody to keep you from leaving." I said yes. She said, "Do you have any reason to believe he can make a credible case for full custody? Any documented issues with your parenting? Any history on record?" I said no. She said, "Then what he did was issue a threat designed to frighten you into compliance. It worked for a time. It doesn't have to work anymore." Those words did something in me. Not dramatic, not a lightning bolt, more like something unlocking very quietly. She told me what the process would look like. She told me what documentation I should start gathering. She told me not to tell Marcus anything yet, not to change any routines, not to let on. She was very calm and very clear, and she treated me like someone who was capable of handling this, which was itself a kind of gift. I had been treated for so long like someone who needed to be managed. Telling Marcus was not a scene I had scripted. I had imagined it many times. I had rehearsed versions of it in the shower, in the car on the school run, in the small window between when the kids were asleep and when he came to bed. In my rehearsals, I was articulate and firm, and I did not waver. What actually happened was I came home one afternoon a few weeks into working with Pamela and Marcus, was in a particularly good mood and making dinner, and the kids were at a neighbor's, and something about the normalcy of the scene, the routine falseness of it, was suddenly unbearable. I said, "I know about Cassie." He turned from the stove. His face went through several things very quickly. I had never seen Marcus lose his composure before, not once in 7 years. He was always composed, that was part of his armor. But in those 2 seconds before he could reassemble himself, I saw something I had never seen: panic. Then the composure came back. He said, "Elena." I said, "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm going to need you to move out by the end of the month." He tried several things. The first was denial, then a version of the thing where he made it about my feelings rather than his actions. Then, when neither of those worked, the threat again. The custody, the house, my reputation. I said, "You should talk to your lawyer about that." He stopped. I think what surprised him most was that I wasn't crying. I had spent years crying quietly over the smaller things. The emotional absence, the lonely evenings, the feeling of being invisible in my own home. I had used up a lot of tears on those. This, somehow, had taken me somewhere past crying. He moved out 3 weeks later. The divorce was not pleasant. I want to be honest about that. Pamela had been right that his custody threat was largely empty. His documented involvement in the children's daily care was thin, to put it kindly, and the evidence of his life outside the marriage was now substantial. But he made it expensive, and he made it slow, which I think was its own form of the same intimidation. Our mutual friends were, for the most part, a complicated geography to navigate. Marcus had many friends. He was, as I have said, someone who accumulated affection wherever he went. Some of them simply disappeared from my life, not in a hostile way, more in the way that people drift when the shared anchor is gone. Some remained formally friendly to both of us in that handled, careful way that means they have chosen not to choose. But there were also the ones who came to me. A couple we had known for years, friends of his from before we met, reached out after word got around about the separation. The wife, a woman named Sandra who I had always liked but never been especially close to, sent me a message that said, "I heard. And I just want you to know that I am not surprised. I have wanted to say something for a long time and did not know how." That message meant more to me than I can explain. Because it told me I hadn't been imagining it. That the person I could barely describe, the emotionally absent husband who was too charming for anyone to believe the description, had been visible to someone after all. More messages came. Slowly, as the story emerged, people made quiet choices. His new girlfriend got an edited version of who he was, I assumed. She lasted 4 months. I heard about this through Sandra, who had stayed in loose touch. Apparently she had left for reasons that sounded depressingly familiar. That he was wonderful at first. That something shifted. That she found herself lonely in a way she couldn't quite explain. I did not take satisfaction in that the way I thought I would. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired that he had taken those same patterns straight into someone new's life without, apparently, any pause or reflection. Tired that another woman had had to discover what I discovered through her own 4 months of figuring it out. But she got out faster than I did, so maybe something in the world is learning something. The rebuilding was not graceful. I want to tell you that leaving an emotionally absent man who had been threatening you into staying felt immediately liberating. And there were moments of that. There were evenings in the new apartment I rented, a place that was too small and smelled slightly of the previous tenant's cooking and was entirely mine, where I felt something I can only describe as the sensation of breathing with my full lungs for the first time in years. But there were also the other evenings. The ones where the kids were at Marcus's and the apartment was quiet and I sat on the floor of my living room and asked myself, who are you now? Because the thing about pouring yourself into managing a difficult situation for 7 years is that you become expert at the situation. You lose track of what you're expert at when the situation is gone. I was 42 years old, newly separated, living in a rented apartment with furniture that didn't quite fit the rooms, and I genuinely wasn't sure what I liked anymore. What I wanted. What I was good at that was mine and not in service of something else. That felt like its own kind of grief. Quieter than the grief about Marcus, in some ways harder, because there's no villain in that story. It's just the cost of time and attention spent in a direction that didn't give anything back. Diane came to visit in January, and we stayed up until 2 in the morning the way we used to when we were young, sitting at my kitchen table with wine and the kind of conversation that goes sideways and circles back and covers 30 different things. At some point, she said, "Who did you want to be before all of this? When you were 25 and you were yourself?" I thought about it for a long time. I said I wanted to write. I had been writing for years. Short stuff, personal essays, I was good at it. I stopped sometime in the first or second year of the marriage. She said,